All right, good morning. As we've come together again, the 6th of September, 2008, we're continuing our study on Abram, becoming Abraham, talking about in Fivefold Ministries handbook, and this is the 7 steps to fulfilling the call. We've made a few tapes so far of the program, and as we continue, we're moving into step 2, preparation. We've just completed answering the call, which is the first step found in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 13, and we're going to now discuss some things that we've learned concerning answering the call. So can someone share with me some of the things that we've learned in the last few weeks dealing with answering the call?
Well, when Jesus was saying that many are called but few are chosen,
yes,
that's where he wanted us to be, chosen. But then, unfortunately, many are not hearing the call,
right,
or they're not answering it correctly.
Okay.
Now, what you showed us is the how-tos to get from the call to being chosen.
Okay, give me some specifics as far as how does one go from being called to become one that is chosen? What does that require?
It requires spending time alone and making sure you're hearing from the right God.
Okay. All right.
Because we all know that even though Muhammad
yes
got his revelations, he didn't hear it from the right God.
Okay.
Now, the thing that I think I noticed with that was Abram was told to get out of his country, away from his kindred, and away from his father's house. Not just to be alone, just so you can sit down and meditate. He had to get away from everybody.
Correct.
Because they would have influenced him, like he said.
Okay.
And then he once he told him that, once he told him what he had to do, then God told him what he was going to do through him.
All right.
But only if he would have done what he had to do, what was required of him.
Okay, so it had to do with, first of all, Abraham hearing God. Second of all, being obedient to what God had called him to do.
Yes.
Is that correct? You know, it is interesting. Well, I'll just take a quick sidestep here. Many times we see in ministry today, we see people that take on titles. They take on a title for a specific reason. You see many people that stand behind a pulpit, whether male or female, standing behind a pulpit, and they have a title of pastor. But in reality, they have no nurturing in them at all. In other words, what I'm saying is they're not nurturers by calling. They're not loving, they're not kind. They may be able to teach, but they're definitely not a pastor. They're not one that has the concern in the heart of the people, yet they have that title. I find that with the present day structure, that's one of the problems that we have out there. We have the recognition of who the pastor is, so that's a paid office. We understand that? That's a paid office usually. So people will sit there and say, okay, well, I'm going to call myself a pastor so I can be paid for the service that I render. Well, what's the problem with that? There you go. It's an evil doing because that's not your calling. You're not called to be a pastor, so you're trying to walk in the shoes of a pastor, yet in reality you have no tools of becoming and being a pastor. Okay? Some more things that we might have learned in the last few weeks.
Also, speaking of that, they don't recognize who they're dealing with. So when it comes to, let's say, being a teacher, you'll call them a pastor just because it feels good.
Okay, and that's true too. I've seen in a lot of ministries where they'll have subordinate leaders and they call them pastors. And in reality, there's no calling at all on those people. They may be musicians, they may be singers or whatever, but for some reason, and more times than not, we find that they're given that title because it is a paid position in that ministry. So you have these subordinate pastors, so to speak, but in reality, they're musicians or they're psalmists or whatever. But that's a title they've hung on them because in the present day structure, it's acceptable to pay a pastor. So they say, okay, we're going to call you a pastor. And here again, we have the problem that we see out there, this upside down ministry. We have people walking in positions that they're not called to. And when I say called to, I'm speaking in reference to God. God is not doing the calling of these people in those positions. It's man appointing. One of the teachings that we do is on the 3 types of leadership. You have the self-appointed ministers, meaning that someone just decided that this is the vocation I want to do, and I think it's going to be an easy job, so I'm just going to say I'm a pastor. Either they go out and they get a training, or they just get some kind of piece of paper that says that they're ordained as a minister. Next thing you know, they're starting a ministry. We got plenty of them around. And that's all part of the upside down ministry, not recognizing who God is, okay, and allowing God to call them and anoint them and appoint them for service. But in the calling, as was stated a few moments ago, many are called, but few are chosen. And the chosen part of that has to do with the obedience of the one that hears God say, I'm calling you, son, daughter, to ministry. In other words, will you submit yourself to me, and I will raise you up. And all through the scriptures we see where God blesses those that are called and are chosen. All right? Yes, over here.
Everybody can't understand if you call and not be chosen.
Mm-hmm.
How's that?
Okay, again, the difference between being called and being chosen begins with you. What are you going to do to answer that call? Recognizing, putting God first. This is what we've been teaching all along, is God must be first and foremost in our lives. Second of all, then, if we have a spouse, our spouse becomes second. Third becomes our children. Fourth, the church, because the church is an extension of the family. Fifth comes the job, okay, and all the other things in order from there. When a man or a woman puts things out of order, doesn't put God first, then the problem is that you put whoever or whatever in that position of God. Many times we find, because we're providers and we're protectors, we put our job before our wives. And the problem with that is that we're out of order, ma'am. Sir, you're out of order. Okay? But what I'm trying to say is when we put something out of order, everything else, the whole structure suffers.
I agree.
Okay. So again, going back to the scripture, many are called and few are chosen. The chosen has to do with you and your recognition of God calling you first. If you do not recognize God is